got most people in tears. It's a shame we can't see them really. I'm Stephanie Hilborn from Women in Sport, and I'm going to be chairing now until about 3 when we wrap up. So just again, just reiterate, thanks to Mariam and Virginia for really just showcasing such a brilliant initiative. And certainly I'm new into Women in Sport. I started as chief exec last year, and one of the big issues I think that we recognise is that the women's sport movement has been viewed very much as a white women's sport movement, and we are determined to change that and work with your organisations and others to make sure that is not the case. So I hope most people on the call might be aware of our charity. It's a charity that's been up and running since 1984. And when I first came in last year, one of the first phone calls I had was from Lisa about the bid for the International Working Group in Women in Sport. And it's really exciting that we're having this conference to inform our bid going forward. Part of that, I had a great, really interesting conversation with Rachel Froggatt from New Zealand, our equivalent. And I think her minister is leading the field in terms of his commitment to women's sport. One of the two really core founders of our charity was Nita White, and she was also not from our charity, but from the government body she was in at the time, the instigator of the Brighton conference back in the 90s. So everything is joining up. I've been listening to the morning session and feeling really inspired. I've been thinking, as a number of people are saying in the comments, what a group of incredible women we're hearing from. And also that this extraordinary time in global history really has reignited the flames of the campaigns for equality. And this goes across the board, from Black Lives Matter to the women's sport movement, and it is all really part of the same movement to achieve a society which is reflective of its parts and not dominated by just one particular segment of that society. I'm really encouraged that being badly behaved is a powerful thing to be. That's really boosted my confidence, I think. And I think the more we can look at how we crush the stereotypes, whether they're racial stereotypes, gender stereotypes, both, the more we can get somewhere. We just can't carry on living in a society where these stereotypes are so prevalent. I'm sure most of you feel pretty gutted to think of how dominated the lives of teenage girls are by worrying about what they look like, and you know, the amount of self-harm that's connected to that. The amount of responsibility that women carry, both for children and parents, has been highlighted. And we're being allowed out now to work, but that adds to the responsibility too. And I think, you know, coming into work in the women's sport movement, it's made, as someone who had previously worked in the Baroness sector for 27 years, it's really brought home the lack of public discourse around the basic profound difference between men and women and our physiology, and that all the time we're doing these things, we're fighting back against stereotypes, we're trying not to get obsessed with how we look, with carrying all this responsibility. We're also dealing with periods, sports bras, childbirth, postnatal depression, the menopause, you know, osteoporosis. I mean, the physical side of being a woman is actually a really important issue, and it's an issue that we don't want to deny. And I think many of the female trailblazers have been forced to slightly deny their physiology, you know, to pop a baby out, come back to work the next day. And partly as a result of that, I think there's been less conversation about that. So we at Women in Sport have been, with other charities, I think, really trying to bring some of those issues more to the fore. Ultimately, as well, I think that a lot of our insights, and Kate mentioned some of them, are pointing towards the fact that when girls and women think about sport, they think about it as a bit of a gritty thing you might have, not so much sport, but exercise as a gritty thing you have to do to try to lose weight. It's all painful and unpleasant. And really what we've been excluded from to a great deal is the joy of sport. And our belief is that no one should be excluded from that joy of sport, as well as the fulfillment, as well as the health benefits. And until we can crush those stereotypes and change the field, that will carry on. As a whole, society will be stronger if we can crack some of these issues, and we need thinking men on our side. I want to now introduce a video from our Sport Minister, Nigel Huddleston, who he can't hear me introduce him, which is quite dangerous in some ways, but I'm going to be good. And I like to think he is a thinking man. And he has, in the context of some of the press coverage that we as a sector have managed to secure about the extraordinary amount of invisibility of women's sport during lockdown, written to all the big national governing bodies and asked them what are they doing about their women's games. And he has also convened a meeting with some of them, which he invited me to, which was great, to test them a bit further on that. Coming in new, I've been interested to see how they are responding to some of those challenges. And I think my experience is they responded slightly differently when in front of the minister than they did when I talked to them on a one-to-one. There is still a very, very deeply ingrained expectation that boys and men dominate the playground, dominate the plays, the cricket pitches, dominate the space, and that's actually okay. But it would be nice to fit us in somewhere is the sort of general mood. But anyway, there's progress we made. Let me introduce Nigel's video, which was very kind of him to contribute, and he has definitely shown some real belief in this, which is very encouraging. So over to Nigel.
Thank you for the opportunity to be part of today's event. I'm pleased to have the chance to speak to you all about this important subject. As we set out in the government's sports strategy, Sporting Future, sport and physical activity should be accessible to all. And the health of the nation, both in terms of physical and mental well-being, is now more important than ever. 2019 was a great year for women's sport. To choose just two, the FIFA World Cup in France and the Netball World Cup in Liverpool were groundbreaking events that shone a spotlight on brilliant women's sports stars. On top of that, the UK hosted the Women's Ashes and a thrilling Solheim Cup. We are seeing the popularity of women's sport continue to grow, with record audiences tuning in or turning up to watch international and domestic women's events. And on the commercial investment side, we have seen record sponsorship deals struck, such as Barclays' sponsorship of the Women's Super League and Boots' sponsorship of women's national football teams. These events are inspiring more women and girls to become active. The latest data from the Sport England's Active Live survey in April this year showed that before COVID-19, there were over 210,000 more active women compared to the previous year. We want to continue to encourage more women and girls to get active and build on the momentum that initiatives such as Sport England's This Girl Can campaign has generated. I'm pleased to say that we are seeing more women working in the sector than ever before. Sport England's annual survey on diversity in sport governance, published in September last year, showed that women now make up an average of 40% of board members across Sport England and UK sport-funded bodies. The government is committed to working with sports to ensure opportunities to progress are open to all. And we want to raise the profile and encourage more commercial investment into women's sport. Sponsorship and media coverage go hand in hand. If women's sport doesn't have the media coverage, then sponsors often don't see it as commercially attractive. It's fantastic to see elite women's sport getting better coverage, but our biggest aim is to encourage more women and girls to get active. The latest Active Live survey data published by Sport England in April this year shows that the gender gap is narrowing, but there is still a gap in participation levels between men and women. And we know there is still more work to be done to break down those barriers that prevent women and girls from being active. I met with sport bodies and women in sport earlier this month to explore further the new challenges COVID-19 has brought and discussed what more can be done to address these. I'm happy to say there was a real shared commitment amongst sports to protect investment in women's sport and promote its growth. I recognise the impact that COVID-19 has had on sport and that women's sport has been hit particularly hard. I want to take this opportunity to assure you that I am personally committed to helping women's sport come out of the current crisis stronger than ever and working closely with the sector and to ensure that that happens. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for the huge part you already play in achieving these aims, and I do hope you enjoy the event.
Right, well, thank you very much, Nigel. And I think without waiting any longer, I will now introduce Tanni to you, who I don't think many of you require an introduction to. So Tanni Grey-Thompson, who even before I came into the sporting world, was very visible to me as one of the most courageous, inspiring campaigners in this space. And from her position, various positions, but also as a life peer, she has really campaigned both for gender equality in sport and on disability front. And I expect Tanni might have a few words to follow up to the Minister. Just before we go into what you have to say, I just wanted to remind people that Mariam and Virginia will be on the panel at the end of this session. But Tanni, it's great to hand over to you. Take us away now.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here and listen to really warm words about where we want women's sport to be. And for me, it's about what is the scale of our ambition. So undoubtedly, it has moved on and developed since I started in physical activity and playing sport as a young woman. But I always think we can do more, we can be better, we should push harder. And it's difficult to get that balance right. And listening to the presentations this morning and videos, and actually listening to Stephanie talk just now, we're all impacted by our personal experiences. Like it or not, I'm a product of my experience in physical activity and elite sport. And my speech is going to change slightly from what I originally intended, because it was something that happened to me this morning. I was on a conference call talking about disabled people and how we can include disabled people in society. And a non-disabled person completely talked over me and told me what my experience was as a disabled person. And I don't think they realised they were doing it, which there's an issue about self-awareness, but actually that is exactly the problem that we have in sport, that we don't, and in wider society, in that how we get people's voices. How do we get the voice of young people? How do we get the voice of athletes? How do we get the voices of coaches? How do you get the voices of women as part of that discussion and able to be listened to and have an impact? And what Stephanie was saying about the expectation of us as women, about 5 minutes before I was due to join the call, I was running around going, I need to find a smart top and I need to brush my hair. And then I thought back to the wonderful poem by Jenny Joseph, which is about an old woman when she's old and grey and wears purple. And I thought, you know what, that is me. It takes me to my 51st year on this planet to think about how we fight against some of those stereotypes of being a woman and being disabled. Now, I'm a Venn diagram. I'm a woman, I'm disabled, I'm Welsh, I'm a mum, I'm an ex-athlete, I will always be a Paralympian. I like to think of myself as a parliamentarian, not a politician. That possibly makes me a politician. And one of the things I am most grateful to my parents for was when I was competing, they never allowed me to just think of myself as an athlete. I had to think about all those different things. But as an athlete, it was quite difficult to have a public opinion, because as an athlete, you're under contract. And there's lots of things in terms of disability rights, things I wanted to work on when I was an athlete, that was really hard to do, because this is view, and I agree and support it to a great extent, There's a whole debate to be had on protesting, not protesting, and all those things. But for me, what was important was to train really hard, be a successful athlete, and then give myself another platform to be able to fight and argue for some of those changes. So I recognise as well that I sometimes cross, you know, as the person who moans, I quite often walk into rooms and say, you know, and see people and go, oh, it's her again. But there is a careful balancing act between talking about our experience, our lived experience, and highlighting the issues to people who may not understand what some of those issues are. And when I was thinking about it, it's like, I'm a woman, but in sport, I'm a disabled person. I'm not a woman in sport, because within the disability world, so sport is differentiated by sex, but actually we're all lumped in together. If you look over the years about, not just in the UK, but other countries around the world, in terms of pay and media coverage of Olympians, it goes mostly to men. But in the Paralympic world, it's actually much more in favour of women. Sadly, not the sponsorship, because even now, after the amazing games that 2012 was, there's virtually no money and sponsorship money in Paralympic sport. But that comes back to lots of issues around disability and how we're perceived. I was 7 years old when the first stranger came up to me in the street and asked me whether my parents had ever thought of aborting me. And at the age of 7, I didn't quite know what that was. When Stephanie was talking about, as an athlete, we're expected to have a baby and, you know, back to training straight away. Absolutely. When I went for my first scan, and actually I have to say, I tried to plan the birth of my daughter around my competition schedule. Every single woman I know has done that. My first scan, the first thing I was offered was a termination. But then I had a team manager who said to me, well, of course, you know, being a mother, it'll make you soft. What you shouldn't say to a team manager is, let me stick a bowling ball inside you, slash out with a knife and see if you're training in 2 weeks' time. So I've learned lots of things along the way. Haven't always got it right, absolutely haven't. But one of the things I'm passionate about is that we're not still going to be arguing for the same things that I was 30 years ago. And the reality is we are still arguing for some of those same things. As a child, I had no right to go to mainstream education. As a disabled child, I was meant to be in special ed. And it was only because I was paralysed when I was already in school. And my head teacher was too busy to contact the local education authority to move me to a special school. Thank goodness for Mr. Thomas. I've had a life that is incredibly different from what it would have been. I ended up in mainstream school because my parents were educated. They read the right newspapers. They knew that there was someone called Baroness Mary Warnock who had written a white paper on education. And my parents threatened to sue the Secretary of State for Wales over my right to go to mainstream school. Not every child has parents who are able to do that, whatever background you're from, not just about disability. So much is dependent on right place, right time, and having people who can argue those things for you. And in a bizarre twist of fate, 30 years later, I am sitting in the House of Lords chamber in a debate with Baroness Warnock, which is celebrating the work she did for disabled children. And I got to say, because of you, I am here. And so rare in our lives, either as an athlete or work or whatever it is, we get to thank the people who have helped us get where we are. And I'm grateful. For me, there's so many people who've done it. I went to mainstream school. I wasn't meant to do PE in my mainstream school. Mrs. Cogbill, slightly scary PE teacher, just said, well, before we even knew what inclusive meant, she got me doing PE with the other children. And there was a special school nearby where I actually started wheelchair racing. But these things shouldn't be luck or accidents. The reality is they still are. There are still a number of disabled children who have no right to be in mainstream education. The Academies Bill makes it easy for disabled children to be excluded. We know from lots and lots of data for Activity Alliance and other places, the challenges that disabled people have trying to access sport and physical activity. And it's a really complicated issue. The sporting system, the classification for Paralympic sport only actually allows a small number of people who would be considered disabled to go through the system. And some of these things, they are what they are. But also, I think we have to think about how we can challenge some of these things, because there should be no disabled child that is refused access to physical activity just because they're disabled. I get letters regularly from parents who are saying these things. So it's how we think differently about sport, governing bodies, sports clubs. The number of times I've turned up there and they say, oh no, we don't deal with, and it always comes with a pointy finger, people like you have to go to the special club down the road. And you know, one of the things I'm proud of, I'm chair of UK Active, and we're doing a lot of work. We've got a project called Everyone Can, we're launching about how we open doors, how we make it possible, how we have conversations with disabled people. Scope said that, and research they did, that lots of people are scared of talking to disabled people because they've never done it before. And my attitude is that if someone who's 95 asks me how I go to the toilet, I kind of deal with that. If it's someone who's 25, because they're just being nosy or don't understand, I try and deal with it in a positive way. But that lack of understanding, because disabled people can be forgotten, that is no excuse to ask some of those deeply sort of personal and difficult questions. So in my sport, wheelchair racing, it's men who've changed the early years of sport. Bob Hall sued the Boston Marathon to allow wheelchair races to compete because it was decided that they'd die if they did a marathon. In the UK, there was a whole group of campaigners who persuaded Ken Livingstone to basically say the London Marathon wouldn't happen unless wheelchair users were allowed to take part. And then Chris Hallam, an amazing athlete, dyed blonde hair, appalling tasting leopard print lycra suits. He didn't allow anyone to patronise him. He challenged and he pushed back, and he demanded kind of inclusion and being treated as an athlete. And I remember going to my first games in Seoul in 1988, and somebody, a friend of the family who found out, got incensed about it. And I was like, well, you know, why? And they said to me, well, wheelchair racing is such an unfair sport. I was like, how's it unfair? And they said to me, well, doesn't it depend on how fast the person is who pushes you? Okay, that was 88. Some of those attitudes still haven't changed. And some of them are still there in terms of that less expectation of disabled people, or we will just tolerate being pushed. And the reality is, for disabled people to protest, for argue, to fight back is difficult, because we have a gender pay gap and we have a Black, Asian, minority, ethnic pay gap. In most businesses, disability pay gap doesn't even make it onto this discussion page because there's so few people there. And these are some of the things I want to challenge. Where are disabled people on boards? Where are disabled people in coaching? Where are disabled people in positions of power? And the reality is, and this is the thing I'm really sort of disappointed in myself, it hasn't changed as much as it should do. One of the amazing things going into 2012 was, and the Olympics and Paralympics, which were incredible, was some research that was done about 2 years before, which was Name a Paralympian. And it was lovely because lots of people went, oh, there's that woman with the funny hair, whatever. And someone said to me, aren't you really pleased? And it's like, no, I'm not. Because if my legacy is not more than people remember my name, that is no legacy. The legacy has to be that we can name Sarah Story, Ellie Simmons, David Weir, Johnny Peacock, that there's a whole raft of athletes that we know and we care about and we can push forward. Paralympic sport wouldn't be where it is without the amazing TV presenter, Helen Rollason. She came out to Barcelona and she refused to cover the games in a patronising way. The coverage from Seoul had been a bit sort of pat on the head and, oh, we're all lovely and marvellous and brave and overcoming adversity, which is a phrase I hate. I absolutely swear the next time somebody talks about the adversity I've overcome in my life, I will scream because of my parents and support. And the adversity I've had is around being disabled, but some people have been through very traumatic experiences to become disabled, but I didn't. I was born with a condition where I got paralysed, didn't miss a day of school, there wasn't any pain. The adversity I had was dealing with people who had patronising attitudes, but my parents helped me deal with that by teaching me and explaining to me about those things. So the turning point for us was Barcelona. A lot of people talk about 2012 being this amazing time. Yeah, and was full crowd, but people came and watched in Barcelona in huge numbers. And that for me was the step that the Games took forward. And Helen Rollason, she was the first woman to present BBC's Grandstand. And when that got announced, she'd come from Newsround and PE teacher and News Sport and knowledge, it was huge. It was front page news. How dare the BBC appoint a woman to present Grandstand? You know, the world is going to end. And she dealt with all those in a very calm and probably quite frustrated way at times. But we should never forget the people who have helped us. And without Helen, we wouldn't have the Paralympic Games where we have it now. Some of my experiences where I've been told I'm a woman, Commonwealth Games back in '94, there weren't any women's wheelchair racing events. 4 English athletes were selected and they were only allowed to take 1 member of staff with them each. And the athletes had different coaches, and because I'd competed at a number of exhibition events before and been there on my own and had sorted out everything that you have to do as an administrator in sport as well as competing, the 4 athletes got together and said instead of taking one of their personal coaches, they wanted me to go. And then when it was found out that I was going to be the team manager, I had a phone call and it started off saying, "My dear," that's never a good call, "I don't mean to be patronising, but you are a woman and you are in a wheelchair and you can't possibly be a team manager." One of the really good things my dad taught me was to ask for it in writing. So I said, "Can I have it in writing?" My fax machine, some young people on the call won't remember those, started clicking a few minutes later, and this individual put it in writing. "You're a woman and you're in a wheelchair and you can't be a team manager." I went to lots of different people and I was told, "Don't rock the boat, don't." And I went back to the 4 athletes and said, "What do you want?" And they're like, "We're taking you, that is it." My punishment for going was I was put in a block of male athletes, cyclists, swimmers, boxers, who were all incredible. Communal showers, they were brilliant. They protected me. Look, we had a rota for showers. You know, they were an amazing group of young men. They were incredible. But I was being punished for fighting the system. And as an athlete, you have to decide how much you want to rock the boat and how much you want to change. And some of those decisions are difficult and sometimes challenging to have. But there were moments in time that changed my life. One of them was meeting Judy Simpson, who was the chair of the Women's Sports Foundation, as it was then, in my early 20s, and opening my mind to, and educating me to things like Title IX and the coverage of women's sports. And, you know, reality back in the 90s, a lot of it was highly sexualized and very uncomfortable. And, you know, the products which still exist that female athletes were being asked to endorse were kind of more shampoo advert. And, you know, I'll be really honest, if someone had ever offered me £1 million to advertise shampoo, I would have done it. I would. But what's interesting now is you've got Liverpool Men's Football Club who are advertising face products. So maybe is that the way I wanted it to even out? Maybe, but the challenge is it's really hard as a woman who's fighting for sponsorship and media coverage, and as a young athlete, to challenge some of those things and to demand to be treated in a different way. I know as a young athlete, if I'd have taken charity money from a company, I would have made a little bit more money than I did. I said before, there's never been much money in Paralympic sport. But actually, as an athlete, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be seen as an athlete and nothing else. So how far have we come? I went to an event last year, international event in Switzerland, and it was really interesting. It was a sport inclusive event, so disabled and non-disabled elite athletes were there. It was barely accessible for the disabled athletes who were competing. And if you were a supporter, fan, who was disabled, or you were a VIP, none of it was accessible. Another event I went to with my daughter, we were watching. I ended up in the VIP tent, which was really cool. It was nice tea and coffee, because there was no spectator seating for disabled people. And they panicked when I arrived, because apparently I hadn't run to tell them that I was coming. and doing things that just a lot of non-disabled people don't have to think about. If anyone on this call thinks about how they get a train, okay, you buy a ticket, you turn up, you get on a train, you find a seat. How disabled people have to get on the train is I'm meant to book 24 hours in advance. I then have to turn up at the train station at least 30 minutes before my train. I have to ask really politely, you know, can I get on a train? Is that okay? And you have to be grateful for everything. My aspiration for disabled people traveling by train, I want the same miserable experience as everyone else. I don't yet have the same miserable experience of commuting as everyone else. I don't want better. I just want to get on a train. But actually the reality is, you know, just very low level discrimination exists like all the time. And, you know, my life after being an athlete, you know, it's actually, a lot of events don't think disabled people are going to be journalists or commentators or things like that. I'm very lucky, you know, a lot of the events I work in, the people I work with, non-disabled, think about those things and sort it, you know, before I arrive. But as much as I'm really, really proud of so much stuff that happened in 2012, the one thing that made a massive difference for me, it was the first time ever in my life I could buy tickets for an event and I could sit with the people I went with. So in the real world, if I want to go and watch something, event, concert, well, sporting event, there's a separate phone line to ring, and I can only sit with one other person because that's my carer. I can't sit with my family. When my daughter was really little, I went to see Winnie the Pooh with her. No, she wanted to see it, not me. Should clear that. Because she wasn't my carer, a member of security wanted her to sit 25 rows in front of me. And I said, yeah, of course, if you take responsibility for my child, if you take safeguarding responsibility for my child, you can do that. So these are the things that, you know, most people don't even think still happens. And if I hear another person tell me that 2012 changed the world for disabled people, that's another thing I'll scream back. It was incredible. It changed the world in terms of Paralympics, but disability hate crime against children has doubled in the last 2 years. Disability hate crime is on the, it's more reporting, it's a better understanding. There's lots of things that are part of that. But we don't expect the Olympics to fix everything that's wrong in society, but we expect the Paralympics to fix everything that is a disability related issue. And actually that's not fair. So 2012, actually being able to buy 4 tickets for an event and sit with my family was, I felt like I'd won a prize. And actually it shouldn't feel like that. And in another scenario, talking about ticketing at sporting events, I talked about how 2012 was amazing for the subtle, for the little things that they did, which were really, really important. And somebody in the room sort of patted my hand and said to me, so what are you going to kick off if you can't sit with your family? Really? In this day and age, we are arguing about some of those things. Seriously, we need to all step up and do things a bit differently and do things in a different way. Final couple of things I want to say is since sort of transitioning into politics, it's fascinating. People say to me, how difficult is it? Well, actually, you know what? There's more politics in sport than there is in politics. But actually, I did a politics degree at university and very grandly said to my head of department, I'm never going into politics, that's for losers. So that's one thing you remembered that I said. But for me, we can all do something that makes a difference to young people's lives. We can all do something that changes the dialogue around disabled people in sport, women in sport, whatever it is. It might be something huge, it might be something little. I spent 2.5 years working on a piece of work of duty of care in sport. I'm still doing that. And there's a whole bunch of recommendations, most of which have been ignored. There's one thing that we as a group absolutely need to make a priority moving forward, and that's positions of trust. If it's illegal for a teacher to be in a sexual relationship with a 16 to 18-year-old, it should be illegal for a coach or someone associated with sport to be in a relationship with a 16 to 18-year-old. And the one thing I'd ask is that as we move forward, the government have come close to promising it and then have moved away. We have to do that to protect, because it's not always young women, but to protect young people in sport. That is something we absolutely need to do. So if you're interested in joining that fight, campaign, battle, whatever you want to call it, my email address is grey-thompson@parliament.uk, and I would really love to have that conversation with you. So after all that doom and gloom, there are really good things happening. When you watch the video of young women talking about fencing and the passion and the commitment, and you go, okay, that is the reason we're doing it. I don't want my daughter who is 18 to be fighting for the same things that I fought for, and she won't be fighting for some of those same things. But we have to make a change to make that happen. This is part of it. Actually, the networking is as important as listening to people like me speak. But think about the change that you can make. Think about the 1 or 2 things that will mean in another 30 years, when I'm no longer around, we're not fighting and arguing for the same thing. And if we can do that, there's a huge amount of things that we can achieve. You just look at all the people who've dialed in and are listening. If a group of us together, you know, thinks differently about what we can achieve, and think about the plan and the battle and the misogyny and all those different things, we can fight this and we can make it better. Thank you very much to everybody who's been and listening to me have a little bit of a personal rant this afternoon. It's been a huge pleasure to be here. It now gives me huge pleasure to as well to pass on to the next section, which is Sally Mundy and Anita de France, who are going to take over from me. Welcome, Sally.
Hi, thanks, Tanni. I'm not letting you quite go straight into Sally, because I need to thank you for that. And it wasn't remotely around. It was an incredibly powerful, sort of, and wise speech. And I think you continue to open certainly my eyes to some of the biggest issues that we face. That was a very fitting romp through some of the biggest issues we still face as society. So you're probably better suited, Tanni, really,